So we've covered a lot so far, but the one thing we haven't talked in detail about yet is the actual organizational structure of a SOC. What different types of roles exist? What does the hierarchy look like? And although security analysts themselves are the backbone of the SOC, there are a lot more potential avenues and roles that we can explore that all work together to provide that strong security operations coverage. So first, you'll typically see 3 different models or arrangements of a SOC. There might be many more that you come across, but in general, we can break it down to the following. First, we have an internal SOC. And this is going to be a SOC that is owned and fully operated by the organization that it serves. So it's going to be staffed with the own company's security analysts or engineers or incident responders. And the SOC is going to be fully integrated within the organization's existing IT infrastructure, and it's going to operate as that typical central hub that we come to think of. Internal SOCs are great because it offers the most visibility that you're ever going to get and the most control over security operations within your company. But it does obviously come with a large upfront cost to invest in those resources and skilled personnel and technology infrastructure and building up the actual SOC, along with ongoing training as well. So as an opposite or alternative, we have the managed SOC or the MSOC. Sometimes it's also known as Security Operations Center as a Service or SOC as, but typically this is going to be a SOC type entity that's outsourced to a third party that specializes in cybersecurity services. So if you end up working in a managed SOC, chances are that you're going to be overseeing a large number of clients and a large number of different systems. And managed SOCs typically deliver that range of 24/7 monitoring and threat detection and incident response and overseeing the SIM, sometimes for a large number of clients like we mentioned. And sometimes different organizations will prefer to have a different amount of managed SOC involvement, right? So maybe a certain customer will have some in-house capabilities and would just prefer to offload the burden of the initial alert triage to the managed SOC. Other times, your team will be expected to provide assistance and lead response activities for a customer that doesn't have that type of thing in-house. But unlike an internal SOC, one of the challenges that organizations and SOC analysts themselves will face working in a managed SOC is that it's going to be hard to maintain visibility and control over the network, because after all, it's managed by the client. And this leads us to the hybrid SOC, or the third model here, which is going to combine the elements of both internal and managed SOCs to sort of leverage a mix of in-house resources as well as bringing in external expertise as needed. So this will allow companies to retain that control over their core security functions, while also allowing for more extended or specialized capabilities like incident response, forensic analysis, malware analysis, and leveraging third parties for that. Now for the more exciting part, we get to talk about the actual roles and titles that make up a SOC. And listen, before we dive in, we need to acknowledge that there's kind of a caveat here. Job titles and roles, specifically in our industry, are often dynamic and might not always align seamlessly to match what your specific requirements are. And also, these roles can vary very significantly between organizations based on, again, their structure, their size, their maturity, and budget. And I'll also mention that we're going to be talking about a tiered model of SOC analysts here, and it's important to recognize that a lot of organizations kind of ditch that traditional tiered model and opt for a more collaborative approach. And there's definitely an argument to be made there that a non-tiered setup can kind of promote a more cross-functional team, but I'm not going to get into the debate here. So to keep everything broad and sort of to the book, we're going to essentially cover everything we can. So let's first start with, of course, SOC analysts, and these are the frontline defenders in a SOC. They're responsible for monitoring and detecting and analyzing and responding to security incidents and threats. So first we have a typical Tier 1 SOC analyst, and these are typically entry-level positions that are tasked with the initial triage and investigation of alerts and incidents. So they're the ones that are doing that routine monitoring of the systems and analyzing log events and alerts, and escalating confirmed incidents to higher tiers as needed. Essentially, their goal is to categorize and prioritize alerts and escalate incidents to the Tier 2 analysts as needed, which leads us to the Tier 2 analysts. And in many organizations, you might see the role of a Tier 2 analyst be described as an incident responder, especially in a SOC team that does not have a dedicated incident response team. So these are going to be more senior analysts, and they're going to be the ones tasked with investigating and remediating escalated incidents. And lastly, here in our tiered model, we have the Tier 3, which is typically the highest tier that you're going to see. And I will speak generally here and say that a Tier 3 analyst is often referred to as a more proactive role in organizations, and they're sometimes actually treated as threat hunters. So these are going to be the most senior level analyst, and they're able to assist the Tier 2s with any complex incidents or anything that gets escalated to them, but they will have a primary focus on proactively searching for suspicious behavior or ingesting threat intelligence and performing threat hunting activities and assessments to detect advanced threats and areas of improvement to better their detection engineering efforts. And I've seen different cases of how this is structured. So you might have a setup where a tier 3 analyst is doing typical incident response and triage during the majority of the week, and maybe they have specific days or specific parts of the week where they specifically focus on threat hunting. Again, this is all dependent on the organization and the management of the SOC. And lastly, here we have a SOC team lead, and this isn't always the case. If your team is large enough, you might have a dedicated SOC team lead who is the one who's responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operations of all the analysts and managing things like workload and providing guidance and mentorship. But sometimes the responsibility of this lead is served by a tier 2 or 3 analyst. So in addition to the SOC analyst, we sometimes have specialized roles that address specific cybersecurity challenges and enhance the overall SOC's capabilities. If your organization is large enough and they invest enough in the SOC, you might see one or several of these roles that you might want to actually work towards as you progress your career. So the first one being an incident responder. So this would be where you have a dedicated team that is responsible for responding to and containing security incidents. So they're going to be the ones that are actually leading the incident response efforts and assessing the severity and the scope and executing incident response plans and dealing with, the collaboration between stakeholders and management, and IT and legal and all the other departments that are involved in an incident. So next we have threat hunters. And these, again, are going to be that proactive role that searches for signs of advanced threats and tries to find hidden security risks within the organization that isn't being detected. So they might be the ones that are developing custom alert and detection rules. They might be ingesting threat intelligence and using that to conduct threat hunts where they try to find known indicators of compromise within their environment. And this kind of leads us to threat intelligence analysts, which are the ones who are going to be gathering and analyzing and disseminating the actionable intelligence on emerging cyber threats or adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, related to their organization's threat model. And they'll do this by collecting and analyzing threat data from various sources. So the organization might subscribe to proprietary feeds and actually pay for that threat intelligence related to their organization, or they might use things like open source intelligence or OSINT, or things like collaborations with information sharing communities. So typically they're going to be the ones producing intelligence reports. They're going to be reporting on indicators of compromise and developing actionable insights that can help things like the threat hunters or the tier 3 analysts and support things like making the organization more efficient with detecting threats. Next, we have a very important role, the security engineer, sometimes referred to as a security architect. And these are going to be the people who design, implement, and maintain the different security controls, technologies, and the overall architecture that the SOC is built upon. So they're going to be the ones getting that hands-on deployment and design and configuration to actively tune security infrastructure like firewalls or IDS and IPS systems. They might also be the ones conducting security assessments or audits and maybe reviews to identify weaknesses and recommend remediation measures to enhance the security posture amongst the organization, which kind of leads us into vulnerability management. And if you're in this type of role, you're typically going to be the one who's overseeing the identification, the assessment, prioritization, and also the remediation of security vulnerabilities within the organization's environment. So they might be the ones conducting vulnerability assessments or scans or coordinating penetration tests to identify weaknesses in systems or applications or any kind of infrastructure within the org. They're going to be the ones going through the reports and prioritizing vulnerabilities based on their risk factors, how exploitable they are, the potential impact and, relevance to the company. And with this analysis, they'll be collaborating with the IT teams and development teams to sort of implement patching strategies and remediation plans. Next here we have forensic analysts, and these folks specialize in digital forensics and incident response, or what we refer to as DFIR. So they're going to be the ones collecting and preserving and analyzing digital evidence to come up with timelines and reconstruct events and trace an attacker's activities to support legal and sometimes regulatory investigations. So sometimes this type of function is left to third-party companies that come in during or after an incident, or sometimes companies engage forensic analysts on retainers for this purpose. So again, these are the ones that are going to be doing the data acquisition to acquire evidence, or performing memory dumps, or documenting their findings, preparing forensic reports, and maintaining chain of custody. They might need to testify as the expert witness in legal proceedings, depending on how severe the incident is. And lastly, here we have a malware analyst. And again, this is one of those specialized roles which you may or may not see in your day-to-day. But they're going to be the ones that are specialized in analyzing and reverse engineering malware to understand its functionality, behavior, and impact on the systems. Personally, I've never seen a dedicated malware analyst at any of the SOC roles I've been in. You're primarily going to be looking at like larger companies or companies that do a lot of research and development. We can think of things like EDR or antivirus companies where having this function would actively benefit the end product of the business. So lastly, let's talk about management type roles. And obviously, management roles are going to provide that strategic leadership and direction and overall oversight for all of these SOC operations. So first we have the SOC manager, and the SOC manager is going to be the one who oversees the day-to-day operations within the Security Operations Center. So they're going to be the ones managing the personnel, the resources, the budget, different activities and priorities within the SOC to ensure that the monitoring, detection, and response efforts are going as well as they possibly can. And sometimes you might have another role like a director of security. Not all the time, but this is typically going to be a senior leadership role that's responsible for defining and executing the organization's overall cybersecurity initiatives. So they're going to be the ones providing strategic direction and governance and general oversight for all aspects of security within the company. And this includes SOC operations. So they might be the ones implementing the standards and policies and controls that protect the organization and support the business objectives. They might be the ones collaborating with executive leadership or board members or external stakeholders to assess risk and prioritize investments. Which leads us into the C level here with the CISO, or the Chief Information Security Officer. And this is going to be the highest ranking executive that's responsible for the organization's overall security program and all of these security initiatives. So many of the things we just mentioned for the director often apply to the CISO. So again, they're going to be on that senior management level and on the board to advocate for investments within the cybersecurity capabilities within the organization.